Greetings, weary traveler. Tonight, Olympus Dreams carries you softly into myth. Let the world fall away as we wander together through ancient pathways where heroes walked beneath skies that remembered everything. In Thebes, where stone walls held back the wilderness and olive trees whispered in courtyards filled with evening light, a child was born under circumstances that would echo through eternity. The night of his birth, stars scattered across the heavens like thrown seeds, and somewhere on distant Olympus, a goddess felt her ancient anger stir anew. The child lay wrapped in soft wool, his tiny fists curled against his chest, unaware that his very existence was an insult to the Queen of Heaven. His mother, Alcmene, traced gentle fingers across his brow, marveling at his perfect features, his surprising weight, the strength already evident in his grip. She had named him Alcides, after his mortal grandfather. But the gods knew him by another name, one that tasted of prophecy and old grudges. Heracles. Glory of Hera. The name itself was a prayer, perhaps, or a plea. An attempt by his divine father Zeus to soften the heart of his eternal wife. It did not work. Hera's hatred was patient and deep-rooted as the mountains themselves. She had not forgotten the infidelity, the mortal woman who had briefly captured Zeus's wandering attention, the child born of that union who carried divinity in his blood despite his human mother. But on that first night, wrapped in his mother's arms, the infant knew nothing of divine politics or celestial grudges. He knew only warmth and milk and the rhythm of a heartbeat not his own. Outside, Thebes settled into darkness. Torches flickered in brackets along the palace walls. Guards paced their familiar routes, their sandals whispering against worn stone. In the nursery, Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon, stood watching the sleeping child. He was a good man, though not the boy's true father. He had accepted Alcmene's explanation with more grace than most men would have managed. The king of gods himself had worn Amphitryon's face to deceive her, appearing on a night when her husband was away at war. Such things happened in an age when gods still walked too freely among mortals. Amphitryon reached out, letting one calloused finger brush the child's cheek. The baby stirred but did not wake. Already, even in sleep, there was something about him. A density, a presence, as though he occupied more space than his small body should contain. The household settled into its nighttime rhythms. Servants banked fires and barred doors. The cook scattered salt across the threshold, an old custom meant to keep malevolent spirits at bay. It would not be enough. Salt held no power over the Queen of Heaven. Months passed in the ordinary way that months do, even in households touched by divine attention. The child grew with alarming speed, outpacing other infants in size and strength. His laugh was loud and free. His appetite was tremendous. His foster father commissioned a larger cradle, then another, then finally gave up and let the boy sleep on sheepskins piled thick upon the floor. Alcmene loved him fiercely. Protectively, with the particular intensity of a mother who senses danger circling her child like wolves around a campfire. She kept him close. She sang him songs about heroes and wise kings, about justice and honor and the proper use of strength. She did not yet know that she was preparing him for labors that would test the very limits of what a man, even a half-divine one, could endure. Young Heracles played in the palace gardens, chasing butterflies between rows of herbs that grew in careful beds. He learned to walk early, to run even earlier, his legs strong as young oak saplings. The servants grew accustomed to his presence, to the way he could lift stones that grown men struggled with, to his endless questions about everything he saw. He had a brother, Iphicles, born the same night from the same mother but fathered by mortal Amphitryon. The two boys were raised as twins, though anyone with eyes could see the differences. Iphicles was normal, healthy, ordinary in the best possible way. Heracles was something else entirely. But they loved each other as brothers do, with the uncomplicated affection of childhood. The palace tutors taught both boys their letters, scratching symbols into wax tablets with bronze styluses. Heracles learned slowly but thoroughly, his large fingers clumsy with the delicate tools. He preferred the lessons taught by the master of arms, the former soldier who showed him how to hold a practice sword, how to stand, how to read an opponent's intentions in the set of their shoulders. Even as a child, Heracles was gentle, unless provoked. He played carefully with smaller children, aware somehow of his own strength. He defended those who could not defend themselves, returning from the market one afternoon with a stray dog he had rescued from cruel boys. The dog remained his companion for years, sleeping across his feet at night, its weight a comfort, in the evenings. When lamps were lit and the household gathered for the evening meal, Heracles sat among his family and felt himself fortunate. He did not yet understand that fortune was a fickle thing, that the gods gave with one hand while preparing to take with the other. He knew only that he was loved, that he was safe, that the world was large and filled with wonders waiting to be discovered. His mother sometimes watched him with sadness in her eyes, though he did not understand why. She would stroke his dark hair and hold him close, and he would smell the herbs she kept in her chambers, lavender and rosemary, and something else he could never name. Years later, in darker times, that scent would return to him unbidden, a memory of safety he could never quite recapture. The king of Thebes, Creon, was a fair ruler who treated Amphitrion's household with respect and favor. He had daughters, beautiful and graceful, who sometimes walked through the palace gardens where young Heracles played. The youngest, Megara, had eyes the color of summer storms and a laugh that rang like bells. She barely noticed the strange, strong boy who blushed when she passed. But time moved forward, as it always does. The child became a youth, the youth a young man. Heracles grew tall and broad, his strength becoming legendary, even in a city that had seen many heroes. He wrestled bulls for sport. He lifted stones that took 4 men to move. His reputation spread like ripples across still water, and in all this growing, all this becoming, the shadow of his destiny stretched long before him. Hera watched from her golden throne, her patience finally wearing thin. The boy had lived too long untested, too comfortable, too happy. It was time, she decided, to remind him whose divine displeasure he carried in his very name. Whispers began to drift through Thebes like morning mist. Strange rumors, dark prophecies. The oracles spoke in riddles about trials and blood, about labors that would span the known world. Heracles heard these whispers and dismissed them, young enough still to believe that good intentions and honest strength were shield enough against whatever fate might devise. He was wrong. The first sign came on a night when the moon hung swollen and pale above Thebes, casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Heracles woke in darkness, his heart pounding without reason, his skin slick with sweat, despite the cool air drifting through the window. Something felt wrong in a way he could not name, like a string pulled too tight, moments before snapping. He rose from his bed, careful not to wake Megara sleeping beside him. They had married in spring, beneath olive trees heavy with blossoms, and the memory of that day still carried the warmth of uncomplicated joy. She stirred slightly, murmuring something he could not hear, then settled back into sleep. He watched her for a moment, her dark hair spilled across the pillow, and felt a tenderness that made his chest ache. The palace halls were quiet. His footsteps echoed against stone as he walked, drawn by an impulse he did not understand. Torches burned low in their brackets, throwing dancing light across walls decorated with painted scenes of gods and heroes. He had walked these corridors 1,000 times, but tonight they felt unfamiliar, as though he moved through a dream of his own life rather than the life itself. In the nursery, his children slept. 3 sons, still small, still innocent of the world's cruelties. The eldest barely 5 years old. Heracles stood in the doorway watching them breathe, their chests rising and falling with the perfect rhythm of the young and untroubled. He wanted to wake them, to hold them close, to tell them things he had no words for. Instead, he simply watched. memorizing their faces in the dim lamplight. Then the fever came. It started as a whisper at the edge of his thoughts, a voice that sounded almost like his own but carried venom he had never felt. The room began to tilt and shift. The shadows pooled in corners like spilled ink. His vision blurred, then sharpened to an unbearable clarity that made every detail cut like broken glass. Hera's curse descended not with thunder or proclamation, but as a poison poured slowly into his mind. She had waited years for this moment, nurturing her hatred like a gardener tending thorns. And now, with divine precision, she struck at the thing he loved most. What happened next would haunt him until his final breath. When the madness lifted, dawn was breaking pale and cold through the windows. Heracles knelt on stone slick with blood that was not his own. His hand shook. The room swam in and out of focus. And slowly, with a terrible clarity of waking from nightmare into something worse, he understood what he had done. The silence was absolute. Even the birds had stopped singing. He did not remember the acts themselves. Hera had been merciful, if mercy could be found in such cruelty, to steal those moments from his conscious mind. But their results lay before him, undeniable and irreversible. His sons, his beloved Megara, all gone, taken by his own hands while something else wore his skin and used his strength for purposes he would never have chosen. The household found him there as morning light grew stronger. They stood in the doorway, frozen by horror and pity in equal measure. No one spoke. No one moved to restrain him or comfort him. They simply bore witness to the ruins of what had been, until finally Amphitryon pushed through the crowd, his face carved from grief and terrible understanding. The old man knelt beside his foster son. He did not ask what happened. He did not offer false comfort or empty words about divine will. He simply placed one hand on Heracles' shoulder and stayed there while the hero's world ended around him. Days passed in fog. Heracles barely moved. He neither ate nor slept. When servants brought food, it went untouched. When physicians tried to examine him for wounds, he did not seem to notice their presence. He knelt in the same spot, staring at nothing, while around him the palace conducted the rituals of burial and mourning. Thebes had loved him once. Now the citizens whispered and made signs against evil when he passed. Children who had played at his feet now hid when he approached. The market grew quiet at his arrival. He understood. He could not blame them. Whatever madness had possessed him might return. He was dangerous. He was cursed. He was a killer of innocence. It was Amphitryon who finally spoke the necessary words. "You must seek purification," the old man said, his voice hoarse from weeping. "This was not your doing, but the stain remains. You must find a way to cleanse your soul, or you will be lost entirely." Heracles looked at his foster father with eyes that had aged decades in days. "There is no cleansing this." "Perhaps not," Amphitryon agreed quietly, "but you must try. For their memory, if nothing else, you must try." So Heracles rose at last from his vigil. He washed the blood from his hands, though he knew he would feel it there forever. He dressed in simple clothes and took up a walking staff. And with no destination in mind except away, away from the palace, away from Thebes, away from everything he had destroyed, he walked through the city gates as morning mist dissolved in sunlight. The road to Delphi was long and dusty. He traveled alone, refusing companionship, speaking to no one. Other travelers gave him wide berth. Something in his face, perhaps, or the weight he carried in his shoulders, warned them to keep their distance. The oracle's temple sat on Mount Parnassus, built into the mountainside where eagles circled and the air tasted thin and clean. Heracles climbed the steep path without hurrying, feeling the burn in his legs, welcoming the physical discomfort as penance too small to matter, but offered nonetheless. The priestess received him in the inner chamber where vapors rose from a crack in the earth. She was old, her face lined like ancient parchment, her eyes clouded with visions of things mortal sight could not perceive. She did not flinch from him. She had seen worse things than grief, mad heroes seeking impossible redemption. "Speak your question," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "How do I atone?" The words came rough and broken. "What price can possibly balance what I have done?" The priestess breathed deeply of the sacred vapors. Her eyes rolled back. When she spoke again, the voice that emerged was not entirely her own, something older and stranger moving through her like wind through hollow reeds. 12 labors, she said. 12 tasks set by King Eurystheus of Tiryns. Serve him without question, complete what he demands, and the gods may grant you peace. The stain may never fully wash away, but through service and suffering you may learn to carry it. Heracles knelt on cold stone. 12 labors. 12 impossibilities, the oracle corrected softly. Each designed to break you, each carrying the weight of divine attention. But if you complete them, if you survive them, you may find something like absolution. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but purpose. And for men like you, purpose may be enough. He left the temple as afternoon shadows grew long. The path down the mountain seemed easier than the climb up, though his heart felt no lighter. 12 labors. 12 chances to die in service of something larger than his grief. It was more than he deserved, and less than he needed, and exactly what remained available to him. The journey to Tiryns took weeks. Heracles walked through lands he had known in happier times, seeing them now as through thick glass, distant and unreachable. He slept beneath stars that offered no comfort. He ate when hunger demanded it, drank when thirst became unbearable, and otherwise moved forward with the steady patience of a man who has nowhere else to go. King Eurystheus was not expecting him. The throne room at Tiryns smelled of cedar oil and old stone. Afternoon light fell through high windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny spirits in the still air. Heracles stood before King Eurystheus, his lion-skin cloak left at the palace gates, wearing only simple traveling clothes that hung loose on his frame. He had lost weight during the journey. His eyes held a quiet that made the guards shift uncomfortably. Eurystheus sat rigid on his throne, one hand gripping the armrest with white knuckles. He was smaller than Heracles remembered, a thin man with a nervous mouth and darting eyes that refused to settle. Zeus had decreed Eurystheus would rule Tiryns while Heracles served. The irony was not lost on either of them. They had been born on the same day, separated by mere hours, and Hera's careful manipulation of destiny. "The oracle has spoken," Heracles said. His voice carried no challenge, no bitterness. Only statement. "I heard." Eurystheus touched his beard, a gesture that might have been thoughtful but looked merely anxious. 12 labors. You will serve me without question, without hesitation, until I deem the tasks complete. Yes. The king's eyes narrowed at the simple agreement. He had perhaps expected argument, pride, some flash of the legendary temper. Instead, he faced a man hollowed out by grief, offering nothing but obedience. Very well. Eurystheus leaned forward slightly. Your first labor, then. In the valley of Nemea, there lives a lion, not an ordinary beast. Its hide cannot be pierced by any weapon forged by mortal hands. It has terrorized the countryside for months, taking livestock and shepherds alike. Bring me proof of its death. Heracles bowed his head. He did not ask for supplies, companions, or counsel. He simply turned and walked from the throne room, while Eurystheus watched him go with an expression caught between satisfaction and unease. The road to Nemea wound through hills covered in wild thyme and sage. Summer heat made the air shimmer above dry earth. Heracles walked steadily, neither hurrying nor delaying, his mind quiet as abandoned temples. Other travelers warned him away from the valley. Entire flocks had vanished. 3 hunters had gone seeking glory and never returned. Parents kept children close after sunset. The valley itself had grown silent. even birdsong fading as the lion's presence spread like a stain. He reached Nemea as golden afternoon light slanted across abandoned farmsteads. Gates hung open on broken hinges. Gardens had gone to seed. Wash still hung on lines, faded by sun and rain, forgotten in hasty flight. The valley held its breath. Heracles found tracks near a dried stream. They were massive, each pawprint pressed deep into hardened mud. He followed them through olive groves where fruit rotted unpicked on the branches. The trail led upward into rocky hills where caves opened like dark mouths in limestone cliffs. He tried first with weapons because it seemed proper to attempt the expected methods. His bow was strong, arrows tipped with bronze that had never failed. He found the lion sleeping on sun-warmed stone outside its den, magnificent and terrible, its mane dark as storm clouds, its body corded with muscle that rippled beneath golden fur. The first arrow struck true, aimed for the shoulder where mortal lions kept their hearts. It bounced away with a sound like striking stone. The lion's eyes opened, amber and ancient. Heracles tried again. 3 more arrows, each placed with perfect accuracy. Each turned aside as if the beast wore armor beneath its skin. The lion rose to its feet, yawning, showing teeth the size of daggers. Understanding settled over Heracles with strange calm. This creature was beyond mortal weapons. It had been born from stranger things than flesh and blood. It carried divinity in its bones, perhaps Hera's gift to the valley, perhaps something older still. Arrows would not serve. Swords would shatter, spears would bend. He set down his bow. He removed his sword and laid it carefully on stone. He kept only his courage and the terrible strength that had always lived in his arms, the strength that had once lifted buildings and now carried only the weight of his grief. The lion watched him approach. It did not flee. Perhaps it recognized something in the man walking toward it with empty hands. Perhaps it simply waited, curious about this creature who faced it without fear. Heracles entered the cave slowly. The darkness inside smelled of old bones and sun-baked earth. His eyes adjusted gradually, revealing a den that went deeper than expected, tunneling into the hillside where ancient limestone had cracked and shifted. The lion padded ahead of him, unhurried, its tail switching in what might have been anticipation. In the cave's deepest chamber, where no light reached and the air tasted of stone and time, Heracles found the beast waiting. They regarded each other in darkness so complete that sight became meaningless. Other senses sharpened. He heard the lion's breathing, slow and steady. He smelled its musk, wild and clean. He felt the displacement of air as it began to circle. When the lion attacked, Heracles was ready. Not with weapons, not with strategy, but with the simple acceptance that this was the task set before him. He caught the beast in his arms as it leaped, feeling claws rake his shoulders, teeth snap near his throat. The pain was distant, unimportant. He wrapped his arms around the lion's neck and held on. They struggled in darkness. The lion's strength was immense, its fury absolute. It thrashed and twisted, trying to break free, to reach him with fang and claw. But Heracles had wrestled bulls for sport in his youth, had grappled with men twice his size and gods wearing mortal disguise. His arms, thick as ship cables, tightened around the beast's throat. The lion fought with everything it possessed. Its roars shook dust from the cave ceiling. Its claws tore furrows in Heracles' back and arms. But slowly, inevitably, the roars became gasps. The struggles weakened. The great heart beating against Heracles' chest began to slow. He felt the moment life departed, felt the massive body grow heavy in his arms, muscles relaxing into death's final surrender. He held the lion gently then, lowering it to the cave floor with something almost like tenderness. It had fought well. It had died without cowardice. These things mattered. When Heracles emerged from the cave, the sun sat low on the horizon, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. He carried the lion across his shoulders, its weight considerable but manageable. He had tried to skin it with his knife, but the hide proved as impervious in death as in life. Finally, understanding came. He used the lion's own claws to cut the pelt free, working carefully in the fading light. He wrapped himself in the skin, fastening it across his shoulders with the front paws tied at his throat. The lion's head rested above his own like a hood, its empty eyes staring forward. It fit perfectly, settling against him as if it had always belonged there. The walk back to Tiryns took 3 days. Word spread ahead of him. Farmers emerged from their homes to watch him pass. Some wept with relief. Others simply stared at the figure wrapped in the impossible hide, this man who had done what armies could not. Eurystheus heard of his approach and made hasty preparations. When Heracles entered the throne room, the king had retreated to a bronze jar sunk into the floor, a hiding place prepared for exactly such occasions. He peered over the rim with wide eyes. "The lion is dead," Heracles said quietly. "The valley is safe." Eurystheus swallowed hard. "I see." His voice echoed strangely from inside the jar. "Keep the skin. You've earned it." Heracles bowed slightly. The lion's head above his own seemed to bow as well, a gesture of acknowledgement between king and servant, fear and strength. "What next?" Heracles asked, because there would be more. There were always more labors, more tasks, more chances to serve and suffer, and perhaps, eventually, to become something other than the man who had murdered his own children in divinely granted madness. Eurystheus remained in his jar, already composing the second labor in his mind, searching for something even the lion slayer could not survive. Outside, evening settled across Tiryns. Somewhere distant, Hera watched and calculated. Zeus turned his attention elsewhere, as was his custom. And Heracles, wrapped in the skin of the Nemean lion, waited with infinite patience for whatever came next. The swamps of Lerna breathed mist from their dark waters, as if the earth itself were exhaling old secrets. Heracles walked south from Tiryns with Eurystheus's second command, fresh in his mind, the words still echoing in that strange bronze jar voice. "Find the Hydra. Kill it. Return with proof." Simple instructions for an impossible task. The lion skin settled warm across his shoulders despite the morning chill. Farmers still watched him pass, though now with something closer to recognition than fear. The cloak marked him as the one who had done the impossible once. Whether he could do it again remained to be seen. His nephew Iolaus caught up to him on the road south, driving a chariot pulled by matched greys. The young man pulled alongside, grinning despite the weight of what lay ahead. "Thought you might need company," he called over the horse hooves. Uncle traveling alone looks too much like tragedy. Heracles allowed himself a slight smile. "Tragedy finds me regardless of company. Then better to face it with family." Iolaus gestured to the chariot bed. "Besides, I brought oil and torches. Seemed practical." They traveled together through country that grew wetter with each passing mile. The hills flattened into marshland where reeds grew tall, and waterbirds called across expanses of still water that reflected the sky like polished bronze. The air tasted of decay and rich earth, of things growing and things rotting in equal measure. Local villages huddled on whatever high ground existed, built on stilts and connected by wooden walkways above the marsh. The people spoke of the Hydra in whispers, crossing themselves with gestures that predated any gods Heracles knew. It lived in the deep places, they said, in the poisoned springs where nothing grew. It had 9 heads, maybe more. It had always been there, would always be there. Best to leave it alone. But Heracles could not leave it alone. That was the point of labors, of penance, of this long walk toward redemption through impossible tasks. So they pressed on, following the stench of sulfur and rot that grew stronger as they approached the heart of the marsh. They found the Hydra's lair near midday when the sun hung white and merciless overhead. The springs bubbled up from underground, their water the color of old bruises, staining the rocks yellow and green with mineral deposits. Nothing grew near them. Even the reeds kept their distance, creating a dead circle around the poisoned water. The hydra emerged slowly, perhaps sensing their presence, perhaps simply curious about what creatures would dare approach its domain. Its body was serpentine, thick as an ancient oak, covered in scales that shimmered oil black in the harsh light. The heads rose one by one on long necks, weaving and bobbing, tasting the air with forked tongues. Heracles counted 9. Each head was distinct, one scarred across the snout, another missing an eye, a third crowned with bone-like ridges. They moved independently but with terrible coordination, 9 minds sharing one purpose. The hydra hissed, a sound like water hitting hot coals, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with poison. Iolaus climbed from the chariot, torches bundled under his arm. The stories say its breath is deadly. Most stories about monsters are exaggerated. Heracles drew his sword, the blade catching sunlight. But not all. He approached the springs carefully, watching how the hydra positioned itself between him and the deepest pool. It was protecting something, perhaps eggs, perhaps simply the home it had carved from this poisoned corner of the world. The heads tracked his movement, pupils narrowing to slits. When he struck fast. The sword whistled through air and scale, severing the leftmost head cleanly. It fell into the marsh water with a heavy splash. Then he understood why Eurystheus had sent him here to die. From the stump of the severed neck, 2 new heads emerged, pushing out like grotesque flowers blooming in fast motion. They were smaller than the original, but growing visibly, necks lengthening, jaws working as if tasting their new existence. The hydra struck back with its remaining heads, fangs bared, venom dripping. Heracles dodged, feeling the poison splash against stone where he had stood a heartbeat before. The rock hissed and bubbled, dissolving slowly. He danced backward, sword still ready, mind racing through possibilities. "Iolaus," he called without taking his eyes from the creature. "Light your torches." His nephew moved quickly, striking flint to tinder, coaxing flame from oil-soaked wood. The torches caught and blazed, black smoke rising in the still air. He held them ready, understanding blooming across his face. Heracles struck again, taking a head from the right side. As the twin replacements began to emerge, Iolaus was there, pressing the torch to the wound. The flesh sizzled and burned, cauterizing instantly. The new heads died before they could fully form, withering back into the scorched stump. The hydra screamed then, a sound that echoed across the marshes and sent birds fleeing from the reeds. It lunged with all remaining heads at once, driven mad by pain and rage and the violation of its regenerative nature. Heracles met the attack head-on, sword moving in patterns he had learned in another life, when he had trained with heroes and thought himself invincible. They fell into rhythm, strike. Burn, strike, burn. Heracles severed heads with brutal efficiency, while Iolaus moved behind him, torch ready to seal each wound before new monsters could emerge. The work was methodical, almost meditative. One head, then another, then another. The hydra thrashed and coiled, poison spraying in wild arcs that forced them to dodge and weave. The central head was largest, crowned with horns that might have been bone or might have been something older. It fought hardest when the others had fallen, striking with desperate fury at the man who had unraveled its immortal nature through such simple means. Fire and blade, blade and fire, the ancient equation of destruction. When Heracles finally took that last head, the hydra's body collapsed into the poisoned spring, coils settling into the water like a ship sinking slowly beneath the waves. The severed head rolled across the stones, its eyes dimming from furious gold to dull amber. Iolaus lowered his torch, breathing hard. His face was scorched from the heat, his hair singed at the edges. "I think," he said between breaths, "I understand why Eurystheus hid in a jar." Heracles knelt beside the hydra's body, studying the creature that had terrorized this region for generations uncounted. Its blood pooled around the stones, thick and black, steaming slightly in the afternoon heat. Carefully, using cloth wrapped around his hands, he dipped his arrows into the ichor. The bronze tips drank it eagerly, the poison seeping into the metal itself. "These arrows will never miss," he said quietly, "and anything they touch will die." "Is that wise?" Iolaus watched the process with concern. Such weapons seem dangerous even to the wielder. Wisdom and necessity rarely align. Heracles stood, the poisoned arrows now bundled carefully in cloth. But the labors ahead will require more than strength. They burned the Hydra's body on a pyre built from dead reeds and driftwood, watching as the flames consumed scale and flesh until nothing remained but ash and the memory of poison. The smoke rose black and thick, visible for miles across the marsh. As evening approached, they drove the chariot north again, leaving Lerna cleaner than they had found it. The poison springs still bubbled, but without the Hydra, they would eventually clear. Given time, given patience, even the most polluted waters could heal. Heracles sat quiet beside his nephew, one hand resting on the bundled arrows, the other holding the lion's skin close against the cooling air. 2 labors completed. 10 remained. The mathematics of redemption stretched ahead like a road with no visible end. But he had learned something in the marsh, watching Iolaus work beside him with torches blazing. Some labors could not be completed alone. Some monsters required more than simple strength. The gods might have cursed him, Eurystheus might fear him, but he was not without allies. Not without family willing to stand in the smoke and heat, offering fire when it was needed most. Above them, stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere ahead, a golden deer ran through moonlit forests, faster than thought itself. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, they would camp beside the road, tend their burns, and rest in the knowledge that the impossible, at least twice now, had proven merely difficult. The matched grey horses slowed to a walk as the last light bled from the western sky. Heracles let them find their own pace, their hooves striking a steady rhythm against the packed earth. The road had climbed gradually from the marshlands, following dry ridges where wild thyme grew between the stones and released its scent beneath the chariot wheels. Iolaus touched his face gingerly, wincing as his fingers found blistered skin. "We should stop soon," he said, "before the dark makes finding clean water difficult." Heracles nodded, scanning the landscape for suitable shelter. A cluster of olive trees stood 100 paces off the road, their twisted trunks silver in the failing light. Beyond them, a spring trickled from between 2 rocks, clear and cold, untouched by poison or divine curse. He guided the horses toward the grove. They unhitched the chariot in comfortable silence, each movement practiced from long travel together. The horses drank deeply from the spring, while Iolaus gathered deadwood for a fire. Heracles unwrapped the poisoned arrows, laying them carefully on a flat stone well away from where they would sleep, their bronze tips gleaming darkly even without direct light. The fire, when it caught, was small and smokeless, built from dry twigs that burned clean. Iolaus heated water in a bronze cup, mixing it with herbs from his traveling pack, plantain for burns, comfrey for healing, yarrow to stop the weeping of wounds. He applied the poultice to his face with practiced hands, then offered the cup to Heracles. "Your shoulders," Iolaus said. "The Hydra caught you at least twice." Heracles had not noticed during the fight, but now he felt it, the burning where poison had splashed across his back, eating through cloth and finding skin beneath. He removed the lion skin carefully, folding it with the reverence it deserved. His nephew's gentle hands applied the same mixture, cool and soothing against the raw flesh. "Eurystheus will not count the Hydra," Heracles said quietly, watching the fire. "He will claim you helped, therefore the labor was not mine alone." He accepted the Nemean lion. That was before he understood what kind of tasks he might assign. Heracles stretched his shoulders. Feeling the herbs begin their work, he will find reasons to extend the count. 12 labors might become 15 or 20 before his fear is satisfied. Iolaus added another stick to the fire. Then we will complete 15 or 20. The simple certainty in his nephew's voice carried more comfort than any poultice. Heracles drew the lion skin around himself again, its familiar weight settling across his shoulders like an old friend's embrace. Above them, stars multiplied in the darkening vault of heaven, the same stars that had watched over his childhood in Thebes, before madness, before grief, before the oracle spoke her quiet words of redemption. "Tell me about the golden deer," Iolaus said, settling back against a smooth stone. "You mentioned it when we left Lerna." Heracles was quiet for a long moment, organizing what he knew from stories and rumors. "The Ceryneian hind," he said finally, "sacred to Artemis, wandering free through forests mortals rarely see. Its hide shines like polished bronze, but its antlers are pure gold, heavy as a king's crown, but delicate as branches after ice. They say it can run from sunrise to sunset without tiring, crossing rivers without breaking stride, climbing mountains where even ibex fear to tread, and Eurystheus wants it captured, alive and unharmed." Heracles smiled without humor. "Because killing it would bring Artemis's wrath, but capturing it might bring mine. Can it be done? I do not know. The admission cost him nothing. There was no shame in acknowledging limits. Strength will not help. Neither will the poisoned arrows, unless I wish to face the goddess herself. This labor requires something else." "What?" "Patience." Heracles spoke the word carefully, testing its shape in his mouth. "And time. The deer does not stop, because nothing can force it to stop. But perhaps it does not need to be forced. Perhaps it can be persuaded." Iolaus frowned, confused. "How do you persuade a deer?" "By learning its patterns. By following without threatening. By becoming part of the landscape it moves through until it no longer sees me as hunter." Heracles watched the fire dance between the stones. "The Hydra taught me that some battles cannot be won through force alone. Perhaps the deer will teach me that some captures cannot be achieved through violence at all." The night deepened around them. Small sounds emerged, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of a field mouse investigating their camp's edge, the horses shifting their weight and breathing softly through velvet nostrils. The spring continued its quiet music, water over stone, older than any god's memory. "Will you go alone?" Iolaus asked. "Yes." Heracles kept his voice gentle. "This task requires one set of footsteps, one shadow moving through the trees. The deer will sense pursuit. I must make it forget. Pursuit is what I offer. How long will it take? A season, perhaps longer." The words settled between them like stones dropping into still water. "A year, if the deer is clever and the gods are feeling playful." Iolaus nodded slowly, understanding without needing further explanation. "A year of following, of patient tracking, of sleeping in forests and drinking from cold streams. A year of learning to move like wind through grass, leaving no impression, making no sound. A year of becoming something other than the hero who strangled lions and burned hydras." "I will wait in Tiryns," his nephew said. "And when you return, I will have the chariot ready. You should return to Thebes, see your family, train other heroes." Heracles met his nephew's eyes across the fire. "These labors are mine to bear. The labors are yours. The journey is ours." Iolaus spoke with the stubborn certainty of youth that has not yet learned when to surrender. "I will wait." They fell into comfortable silence after that, each man alone with his thoughts while remaining together in the firelight. Heracles thought of forests he had never seen, of moonlight through ancient oak leaves, of a deer that ran like captured starlight given form and freedom. Somewhere in the distant north, beyond mountains, he would learn to climb with new quietness. The Ceryneian hind moved through its endless circuit of sacred groves and hidden meadows. He would find it. Not through strength or cunning, not through weapons or divine favor, but through simple, patient following. He would learn its rhythms, understand its paths, become familiar enough that when the moment came, beside some frozen stream, perhaps, or in a clearing where first snow had fallen, it would allow itself to be touched. The fire burned low, collapsing into coals that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Iolaus had fallen asleep, his breathing deep and even, one hand still touching the scorched skin of his face. Heracles remained awake, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, feeling the pull of the next labor like a compass pointing toward undiscovered country. Tomorrow they would reach Tiryns. Eurystheus would declare the Hydra labor invalid, as predicted, his voice shaking with relief that Heracles had returned at all. The Count would remain at 1. But that was tomorrow's mathematics. Tonight, beneath stars and silence, Heracles allowed himself to rest in the space between labors, where he was neither monster nor hero, but simply a man beside a dying fire, preparing for a chase that would measure time in seasons rather than heartbeats. The lion skin kept him warm. The poisoned arrows lay safely distant. And somewhere far to the north, a golden deer paused in its running, lifting its crowned head to scent the wind, unaware that a patient shadow had begun, in this quiet moment, its long pursuit. The road to Tiryns stretched dusty and pale beneath morning light. Heracles and Iolaus rode side by side, the matched grey horses moving at an easy walk that raised no hurry and left no question of their destination. The countryside rolled past in gentle waves, terraced vineyards heavy with late grapes, stone walls marking fields where shepherds watched their flocks. Small shrines to local gods standing at crossroads like patient sentries. They spoke little. The silence between them had settled into something comfortable, almost companionable. Iolaus sat carefully in his saddle, favoring the side where the burns still pulled tight across his jaw and neck. The herbs had helped, but healing took time, and fire left marks that faded slowly. Heracles noticed but said nothing. Some wounds needed acknowledgement, others needed only patience. By midday, they reached the outskirts of the city. Tiryns rose before them, its cyclopean walls massive and ancient, built by hands that had forgotten the lightness of human scale. The stones fit together without mortar, each block large enough to crush a dozen men, yet placed with such precision that not even a blade could slide between them. The gates stood open, but guards watched from above, their spears catching sunlight like scattered promises of order. Word of their approach had traveled faster than horses. By the time they entered the main courtyard, a crowd had gathered, citizens and servants, soldiers and merchants, all drawn by curiosity and the magnetic pull of myth made flesh. They stared at the lion skin draped across Heracles' shoulders, at the great paws knotted across his chest, at the mane that fell golden and impossible down his back. No one spoke. The silence felt heavy, expectant, like the pause before thunder. A herald emerged from the palace steps, his face composed in careful neutrality. "King Eurystheus bids you wait in the lower hall. He will receive your report when he is ready." Heracles nodded. He slid from his horse, handed the reins to a wide-eyed stable boy, and walked toward the palace entrance with the steady pace of someone accustomed to waiting. Iolaus followed, limping slightly, his scorched face drawing winces from those who glimpsed it clearly. The lower hall was cool and dim, lit by oil lamps that flickered in their bronze holders. Benches lined the walls, carved from dark wood and worn smooth by countless petitioners. Heracles sat, the lion skin spreading around him like liquid gold. Iolaus remained standing, too restless or too proud to settle. They waited. An hour passed, measured by the slow movement of light through high windows. Then another. Servants came and went, carrying wine and scrolls, their footsteps quick and their eyes averted. No one offered refreshment. No one asked questions. Finally, as afternoon began its gentle slide toward evening, the herald returned. "The king will see you now." In the throne room. The throne room of Tiryns was not grand by the standards of greater kingdoms, but it carried weight nonetheless, the accumulated authority of generations. The settled certainty of power exercised without question. Frescoes covered the walls, depicting bulls and griffins, dancers and warriors frozen in eternal motion. Columns rose toward a ceiling painted blue as summer sky. Eurystheus sat upon his throne, small and tense, his fingers gripping the armrests as if the chair might throw him. He was not a warrior king. His strength lay in lineage and divine favor, in being born at the precise moment that Hera's machinations required. He wore purple robes edged in gold, a crown that sat slightly too large upon his narrow head. His eyes, when they met Heracles's, held fear and resentment in equal measure. "You return." The king's voice cracked slightly, then steadied. "I see you wear the Nemean lion's pelt." "The first labor is complete." "Yes, my lord." "And the second?" Eurystheus leaned forward, greedy for details that might justify new complaints. "The Lernaean Hydra, slain." Heracles kept his tone flat, factual, its head severed and burned, its body buried beneath stone. "Witnesses, my nephew Iolaus, who stands beside me, the nymphs of Lerna who watched from the reeds, the earth itself, which drank the creature's blood." Eurystheus's lips thinned. He glanced at Iolaus, taking in the burns, the exhaustion, the evidence of genuine struggle. Then he shook his head with practiced regret. "The labor cannot be counted." The words fell into silence like stones into deep water. "My lord?" Heracles kept his voice level. "You had aid." Eurystheus gestured vaguely toward Iolaus. "Your nephew burned the stumps while you fought. The labors must be completed alone, by your hand and yours only. Otherwise, what proof exists that you accomplished them?" Heracles said nothing. He had expected this. Hera's influence moved through Eurystheus like wind through wheat, bending him toward cruelty with such consistency it became almost predictable. The king feared Heracles too much to face him honestly, so he turned to technicalities, to rules invented after the fact, to small revenges that cost him nothing. "The count remains at 1, Eurystheus continued, warming to his pronouncement, "but I am not unreasonable. The second labor stands completed, even if uncounted. You may proceed to the third." He paused, savoring the moment. "Bring me the Ceryneian hind," the king said, "alive and unharmed. The golden deer sacred to Artemis herself. Capture it and return it to this hall, and perhaps I will believe your strength extends beyond mere violence." "As you command, my lord." Eurystheus blinked, surprised by the easy acquiescence. He had expected argument, anger, some flash of the legendary rage that had destroyed Heracles' family. But the hero simply bowed, turned, and walked from the throne room with the same steady patience he had carried through the door. Iolaus followed. They descended the palace steps in silence, retrieved their horses, and rode through the city gates as the sun touched the western hills. Outside the walls, Heracles finally spoke. He fears counting too quickly toward 12. Each rejection buys him time to imagine new impossibilities. "Will you challenge him?" "No." The word came soft but absolute. "I accepted these labors to cleanse my soul, not to prove myself to frightened kings. If Eurystheus wishes to discount the Hydra, let him. The gods know what I have done. I know what I have done." His mathematics changed nothing. They rode in silence for another mile before Iolaus asked the question that had been building since the throne room. "When do you leave for the north?" "Tomorrow." "At dawn." Heracles turned his face toward the distant mountains, already visible as dark shapes against the reddening sky. "The deer will not wait for my convenience, and winter comes early in the high country. I will prepare supplies. Bread, dried meat, wineskins, no." Heracles smiled, gentle but firm. "I travel light. What I need, I will find. The deer exists outside the rhythms of human comfort. To follow it, I must learn to exist there as well." That night, they made camp beneath an oak older than the city they had left behind. The tree's branches spread wide and protective, its roots deep enough to remember when Tiryns was only stones scattered across hills. Heracles built no fire. Instead, he sat with his back against the ancient trunk, the lion skin around his shoulders, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening vault above. Iolaus sat nearby, quiet and thoughtful. A year is a long time. Yes. And at the end you may fail. The deer may never allow itself to be caught. Also yes. Heracles tilted his head back, studying the constellations. But failure is only failure if I judge it so. To follow the deer for a year, to learn patience. To move through forests without disturbing them, these are victories, whether or not I return with the creature in my arms. Eurystheus will not see it that way. Eurystheus does not need to. The hero closed his eyes, breathing deeply the cool night air scented with earth and oak leaves and the distant promise of winter. I do not complete these labors for him. I complete them because the alternative is to remain trapped in the moment when madness took me, when I destroyed what I loved most. Each labor carries me further from that moment. Each one teaches me something I did not know I needed to learn. The night settled around them like a cloak. Somewhere in the north, beyond mountains and meadows, beyond villages where hunters spoke in whispers of impossible creatures, the Ceryneian hind moved through moonlit groves on hooves that made no sound. Its antlers gleamed like frozen starlight. Its eyes held the cold wisdom of creatures that existed before words, before weapons, before the first mortal looked at the sky and imagined gods watching back. Heracles would find it. Not tomorrow, not next month, but eventually. He would follow with the patience of water-wearing stone, with the persistence of seasons returning, with the quiet determination of someone who had learned that true strength lay not in conquest, but in understanding when to wait. The morning air carried frost on its breath when Heracles woke beneath the oak. Stars still scattered the western sky, pale against the coming dawn. He rose without sound, leaving Iolaus sleeping beneath his cloak, and walked into the changing light with only the lion skin and a single water skin tied at his belt. No provisions. No weapons beyond his club, which he carried more from habit than necessity. The deer would not be taken with force. Of this he felt certain. The road north climbed gradually through country that grew wilder with each passing mile. Villages appeared less frequently. The cultivated fields gave way to meadows dotted with stones, then to forests of oak and pine that held their own counsel. Heracles walked steadily, not hurrying, letting his body find the rhythm that could be sustained for months rather than days. By afternoon of the first day, the path had become a suggestion rather than a certainty. By evening, it disappeared entirely into knee-high grass that whispered against his legs. He made camp in a clearing where a stream ran clear and cold over smooth stones. No fire again. Just the sound of water and wind and his own breathing. The second day brought him into foothills where deer tracks marked the soft earth near springs. Ordinary deer, brown and cautious, who watched him pass with liquid eyes before bounding away through the underbrush. He studied their movements, the way they tested the wind, the stillness they could hold when danger approached. He was learning their language. On the third day he met a shepherd tending goats on a rocky slope. The man's face was weathered as old leather, his hands gnarled around a staff worn smooth by decades of use. "You walk far from the roads," the shepherd observed. "I seek the golden deer." The old man nodded slowly, unsurprised. "Many have sought. None have found, not in my lifetime or my father's before me. It moves through these mountains like mist, there and gone, real as dawn, but no more catchable. Have you seen it? Once. 20 years ago, near the high lake where the moon reflects in water so still it becomes sky." The shepherd's eyes grew distant with memory. It drank at midnight, and the reflection showed 2 deer, one above and one below, neither more solid than the other. When I breathed, it was gone. Heracles thanked him and continued climbing. The high lake became his first destination, though he knew the deer would not return to places where it had been seen. Creatures sacred to gods did not repeat themselves. They existed in the eternal present, each moment new, each appearance a gift that could not be anticipated or earned. He reached the lake on the 5th evening. The water spread before him like polished bronze, perfectly circular, cradled in a basin of ancient stone. He sat on the shore and waited. The moon rose, small and distant. Stars appeared in both sky and water. He watched until dawn without moving, and the deer did not come. This became his pattern. Walk until he found places that felt right, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. Wait with the patience of stone. Move on when the waiting had taught him what it could. Weeks passed into months. Summer's heat gave way to autumn's gold. The forest transformed into cathedrals of copper and amber, the leaves falling like blessings onto paths he followed that led nowhere in particular. He ate berries when he found them, nuts gathered from beneath trees, fish caught with his hands in streams so cold they numbed his fingers. His body grew lean and hard, his movements increasingly quiet. Hunters sometimes crossed his path. They shared what news they carried from the lowlands. King Eurystheus had announced the hero's quest. Wagers were being placed on his return or failure. The odds favored failure. Heracles listened without comment and continued north. The first snow came early that year, dusting the high peaks with white that glowed against gray skies. He fashioned warmer clothing from hides traded with mountain folk, wrapping his feet in wool and leather. The cold sharpened everything. His breath frosted the air. The silence grew deeper, more absolute. On a morning when frost painted every branch with silver, he found the first true sign. A track in fresh snow beside a frozen stream. The hoofprint was delicate, impossibly perfect, and where it pressed into the snow, a faint warmth remained. He knelt and touched the impression with his bare hand. His fingers tingled as though he had brushed against summer. He followed. The tracks led through a narrow valley where ice hung from cliff faces in curtains of blue and white. They crossed frozen meadows and climbed switchbacks barely visible beneath the snow. He followed for 3 days without stopping, sleeping in brief intervals against sheltering rocks, eating nothing. Drinking melted snow. On the third evening, he saw it. The deer stood in a grove of birch trees, their white trunks pale as bone against the gathering dusk. Its coat shone gold, not the yellow gold of metal, but the living gold of late afternoon sunlight on wheat fields. The antlers rose from its head like branches grown from moonbeams, each point tipped with light that had no visible source. It watched him. He stopped walking. They remained motionless, 20 paces apart, while the world held its breath. The deer's eyes were dark and knowing. It did not fear him, did not prepare to flee. It simply stood, magnificent and impossible, allowing itself to be seen. Heracles understood then that this was the real labor. Not the capture, but this moment. The recognition that some things existed beyond possession, that beauty could be witnessed without being owned. He bowed, slowly and deeply, honoring what stood before him. The deer lowered its head in response, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or farewell. Then it turned, moving between the birch trees with steps that left no mark in the snow, and vanished into the blue shadows of evening. He did not follow. Not that night. But he did not stop seeking either. Winter deepened. He grew thinner, harder, more creature than man. His hair and beard grew long and wild. He learned to move through forests without disturbing sleeping birds, to cross frozen lakes without cracking ice, to wait in stillness so complete that deer fed within arm's reach. Spring came eventually, tentative and fragile, touching the high country with green promises. Streams broke free from ice with sounds like distant bells. The deer appeared more frequently now, always at dawn or dusk, always in places of threshold beauty. A waterfall where rainbows danced in spray, a meadow carpeted in wildflowers that had no names in mortal tongues. Each time, Heracles watched and waited and did not pursue. Each time, the deer acknowledged him before departing. They were learning each other, hunter and hunted, in a dance older than language. On a morning exactly 1 year from when he had left Tiryns, Heracles woke to find the deer standing 10 paces from where he lay. The sun had just risen, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and amber. The creature's golden coat caught the light and held it, glowing from within. Heracles rose slowly. The deer did not move. He approached, one step at a time, hands empty and open. The deer's eyes never left his face. When he stood close enough to feel the warmth of its breath, close enough to see the intricate patterns etched in its golden antlers, he reached out. His hand touched its neck gently, reverently. The fur was softer than thought, warmer than sunlight. The deer allowed the touch. They stood together in the dawn while the world awakened around them, hunter and sacred creature, bound by a year of patient pursuit and mutual respect. Then, with careful hands and whispered apologies, Heracles lifted the deer across his shoulders and began the long walk south toward Tiryns, carrying grace itself back toward those who would never understand what he had truly captured. The weight across his shoulders was both lighter and heavier than expected. Lighter because the deer seemed almost to carry itself, its body warm and yielding without resistance. Heavier because of what it represented. Trust given, freedom suspended, beauty constrained even by gentle hands. Heracles walked southward through forests still damp with morning dew. The deer remained calm against his back, its breathing steady and slow. Sometimes its head rested against his shoulder. Sometimes it lifted to watch the passing trees with those dark, knowing eyes. He did not hurry. Each step was measured, careful, conscious of the precious burden he carried. Birds sang in the canopy above, unafraid of the strange procession below. A fox watched from a fallen log, amber eyes curious but not alarmed. The world seemed to recognize what moved through it and made space accordingly. By afternoon, they reached lower elevations where the air grew warmer and the trees changed from pine to oak. Heracles stopped beside a spring that bubbled from mossy rocks. He set the deer down gently, keeping one hand on its shoulder. It drank from the clear water, delicate muzzle barely disturbing the surface. He drank after, cupping water in his palm, tasting minerals and stone. The deer could have fled then. He had loosened his grip. But it stood quietly, waiting for him to lift it again, as though they had reached some wordless agreement during the year of pursuit. When he resumed walking, the deer settled across his shoulders with something that felt like patience or perhaps resignation. They passed through villages where children ran out to stare. Women drew sacred signs in the air. Men removed their caps and bowed, recognizing holiness even without understanding its source. Heracles did not stop to explain. The deer's golden coat drew stares like flame draws moths, but he moved through attention as he had moved through forests. Steady and unhurried. Dusk found them in a meadow ringed by ancient apple trees. The grass grew tall here, untouched by grazing animals, and when evening wind moved through it, the sound resembled distant water. Heracles laid the deer down carefully and sat beside it, back against an apple tree trunk grown thick with centuries. The deer rested its head in the grass, sides rising and falling with each breath. Stars began appearing in the darkening sky, one by one, like silver flowers blooming in blue gardens. Heracles watched them emerge, these eternal witnesses to everything below, and wondered if they remembered the night of his birth, when Hera's hatred had first fallen upon him like winter frost. He had been innocent then, a child unaware of divine grudges and cosmic resentments. Now he carried the weight of lives taken in madness, of years spent seeking redemption through impossible tasks, of a year pursuing something he knew could never truly be his to possess. The deer shifted beside him, drawing his attention back to earth. Its eyes reflected starlight, holding tiny constellations in their depths. For a moment, Heracles felt the urge to simply release it, to watch it bound away into darkness, and return to Tiryns empty-handed, accepting whatever punishment Eurystheus might decree. But he had learned that redemption required completion. Half-finished labors satisfied neither gods nor mortals. He had begun this journey, and now he must see it through to whatever ending waited. They slept there beneath the apple trees, man and sacred deer, while night deepened around them and owls called soft questions to the darkness. Morning arrived with mist hanging low across the meadow, turning everything ghostly and uncertain. Heracles woke to find the deer already standing, watching the eastern horizon where sun would soon appear. He stood and lifted it once more, feeling the familiar warmth settle across his shoulders. The journey continued. Days blurred together, marked only by changing landscapes. High country gave way to rolling hills, then to flatlands where grain grew in ordered rows and roads ran straight as spear shafts. People became more frequent, their voices louder, their eyes less reverent and more calculating. By the time Tiryns appeared on the horizon, its walls rising against afternoon sky, Heracles felt the familiar weight of civilization pressing back upon him. The year in wilderness had changed him in ways he could not quite name. He moved differently now, thought differently, understood silence as a language rather than mere absence of sound. The gates opened at his approach. Guards stared but did not speak. He walked through streets where crowds gathered, their voices rising in excited speculation. Children pointed at the golden deer. Women whispered prayers. Men measured the beast with eyes that calculated worth in gold or glory. Heracles felt the deer tense slightly against his back, responding to attention that lacked the forest's reverence. He tightened his grip gently, offering what small comfort he could, and continued toward the palace. King Eurystheus waited in his throne room, surrounded by advisors and guards. The king's face showed equal parts relief and disappointment, as though he had hoped the labor would prove impossible, yet feared its completion. His eyes fixed on the deer with hunger that had nothing to do with understanding. Heracles knelt, lowering the sacred creature to the marble floor. The deer stood on uncertain legs, golden coat dimmed somehow beneath painted ceilings and torchlight. It looked smaller here, diminished by walls and human ambition. "The Ceryneian hind," Heracles said quietly, "captured and delivered as commanded." Eurystheus leaned forward, greed brightening his weak face. "Such a prize. The priest's will." He reached toward the deer. It flinched backward, eyes wide. And in that instant, Heracles understood the final lesson of this labor. He released his grip entirely, stepping back. The deer stood frozen, caught between man and king, between forest freedom and palace cage. Then, with a movement faster than sight, it turned and bounded toward the throne room entrance, hooves striking marble with sounds like distant thunder. Guards moved to block its path. Heracles spoke a single word, low and commanding. They hesitated. In that heartbeat of indecision, the deer flashed past them, golden coat blazing briefly in torchlight, and vanished into the city beyond. Eurystheus leapt to his feet. "You fool! You've released it. I delivered it as commanded," Heracles replied calmly. "You did not command that I hold it forever." The king's face purpled with rage, but he could find no argument against the simple truth. The labor had been to capture the hind, not to imprison it. And capture required only that moment of possession, that instant when hunter's hand touched sacred prey. Heracles bowed and turned to leave. Behind him, Eurystheus sputtered commands to guards who would never catch what had already returned to wilderness. The deer was gone, racing northward toward high country and freedom, carrying with it the memory of a hunter who had learned restraint. Outside, beneath open sky, Heracles breathed deeply. 7 labors now complete. 5 remained. And somewhere in the forests he had left behind, a golden deer ran beneath stars that remembered everything. The wind from distant Crete reached Tiryns 3 days later, carrying salt and unfamiliar spices on air that tasted of islands. Heracles stood in the palace courtyard, hands idle for the first time in weeks, when Eurystheus summoned him with unusual haste. The king's voice carried an edge of poorly concealed excitement. Inside the throne room, sunlight slanted through high windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny stars. Eurystheus paced before his chair rather than sitting, a nervous energy making his movements quick and uncertain. "Crete," the king announced without preamble. King Minos has a problem that even his own heroes cannot solve. A bull. Divine, mad with fire that burns from within. Heracles waited, understanding that Eurystheus would eventually reach his point. This is the beast that carried Europa across the waves. Eurystheus continued, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. Poseidon's gift to Minos. But the king failed to sacrifice it as promised, and now it ravages the island. Crops destroyed, villages threatened. Children dare not play in open fields. The king stopped pacing and fixed Heracles with eyes that held calculation beneath their surface concern. Bring me this bull. Alive. Proof that even divine rage can be tamed by mortal hands. Heracles nodded once and left without speaking. Behind him, he heard Eurystheus settling into his throne with a satisfied sigh, already imagining the glory such a beast would bring to his court. The journey to Crete took a week. Heracles found passage on a merchant vessel that smelled of olive oil and wool, standing at the prow as wind pushed them steadily south. The sailors gave him space, recognizing something in his bearing that discouraged casual conversation. At night, he watched stars shift overhead, constellations turning like wheels marking heaven's passage. Crete appeared on the morning of the seventh day, a dark line against blue water that gradually resolved into cliffs and beaches, whitewashed buildings clinging to hillsides like seabirds to nesting rocks. The air tasted different here, thick with thyme and rosemary, warm even in early spring. King Minos received him in a palace of impossible complexity, corridors branching and turning until direction lost all meaning. The king was older than Eurystheus, his face carved by wind and responsibility into something resembling weathered stone. He did not waste time with ceremony. The bull runs wild in the western hills, Minos said, spreading a rough map across cedar table. My hunters track it, but none dare approach close enough for capture. It gores trees for sport. The earth burns beneath its hooves. Heracles studied the map, noting water sources and elevation changes. How long since it was free? 3 years. Minos's voice carried shame. 3 years since my pride exceeded my wisdom. Poseidon's anger manifests through the beast's fury. I will need no hunters, Heracles said. Their presence would only complicate what must be simple. Minos nodded slowly, relief and skepticism warring in his expression. The western road leads to the hills. Follow smoke. The bull leaves destruction that marks its passing. The western road wound through olive groves where ancient trees grew twisted and patient, their silver-green leaves whispering in constant wind. Heracles walked in afternoon heat, lion skin across his shoulders drawing startled looks from farmers who worked terraced fields. Children pointed and whispered. Grandmothers made signs of protection, though whether against him or for him remained unclear. By evening, he left cultivated land behind. The hills rose gentle and wild, covered in low brush that released sharp scents when disturbed. He found the bull's trail easily. Broken branches, scorched grass. Deep hoofprints pressed into earth that still held warmth like fading fever. He followed the destruction upward into high country where wind moved unobstructed across stone and scrub. The sun descended toward western sea, painting everything in shades of copper and gold. Somewhere ahead, the bull waited. Heracles found it near sunset in a small valley ringed by rock formations that stood like ancient watchers. The beast stood motionless at the valley's center, head lowered, sides heaving with breath that steamed in cooling air. Even from distance he could see the unnatural light in its eyes, blue-white and burning. The bull was massive, larger than any mortal creature, its coat the color of new snow touched by firelight. Muscles moved beneath skin with terrible beauty. This was no ordinary animal. Divine blood ran in its veins, carrying both blessing and curse. Heracles descended into the valley slowly, making no attempt at stealth. The bull's head lifted, nostrils flaring. It pawed the ground once, twice, sending small stones skittering. Steam rose from where hooves touched earth. "Peace," Heracles said softly, though he knew the beast understood no language except its own rage. "I mean no harm, only capture." The bull charged, not with blind fury but with purpose and intelligence, hooves striking ground in measured rhythm. Heracles stood his ground until the last possible moment, then stepped aside with movement born from years of practice. The bull passed close enough that he felt heat radiating from its body, saw the divine fire burning just beneath its skin. It wheeled and charged again, and again. Each time Heracles avoided the horns, learning the rhythm of its attack, understanding the pattern of its fury. This was not cruelty. It was pain. The beast hurt with heavenly fire that could find no release. On the fourth charge, Heracles moved differently. Instead of stepping aside, he met the bull's rush with hands extended, catching its horns near the base where bone met skull. The impact drove him backward 3 steps, but he held firm. The bull thrashed, trying to shake him loose. Heracles held on, feeling muscles protest and bones creak with strain. Slowly, gradually, he began to press downward, forcing the massive head toward earth. The bull's front legs buckled. It sank to its knees with a sound like distant thunder. "I know," Heracles murmured, pressing his weight across the beast's neck. "I know what it means to carry fire, not your own. To burn with rage you cannot name." The bull's struggles weakened. Not from exhaustion, but from something else. Recognition, perhaps, or simple relief at being held by someone strong enough to understand strength's burden. They remained there as sunset deepened into twilight. Man and God-touched beast, both breathing hard, both marked by divine attention they had never sought. Slowly, carefully, Heracles shifted his grip, wrapping his arms around the bull's thick neck in something almost resembling embrace. "Come," he said quietly. "Captivity is not freedom, but it may be rest." The bull rose to its feet with Heracles still holding tight. It shook its head once, testing his grip, then went still. The fire in its eyes dimmed to something like resignation. Together they walked from the valley as stars emerged overhead, ancient and indifferent to mortal struggles far below. The return journey took 3 days. They moved slowly through hills that grew gradually less wild, passing through olive groves where workers stopped their tasks to stare. The bull walked calmly now, divine fury banked to embers. When children approached with offerings of apples and grain, it accepted them with surprising gentleness. At the port, Heracles arranged passage back to Greece. The ship's captain blanched at sight of the bull, but gold smoothed his hesitation. They sailed under full moon that turned the sea to hammered silver. Standing at the rail with one hand resting lightly on the bull's shoulder, Heracles felt something shift inside him. 8 labors complete, 4 remained. And with each impossible task, he understood more clearly that strength alone would never be enough. Wisdom, patience, compassion. These were the true tests hidden beneath surface commands. The bull shifted against him, warm and solid. Somewhere ahead, Tyrrhens waited with walls and expectations. But here, beneath stars on moving water, there was only the gentle rhythm of waves and breathing. For this moment, that was enough. The ship docked at dawn 3 days later, timbers groaning against worn stone as sailors secured ropes with practiced efficiency. Morning mist clung to the harbor, softening edges of buildings and masts until the world seemed painted in watercolor shades of gray and pearl. Heracles led the Cretan bull down the gangplank, its hooves striking wood with sounds that echoed across quiet water. Word had traveled faster than any ship. A small crowd had gathered despite the early hour, merchants and fishermen and children who should have been sleeping. They kept their distance, but not from fear. The bull walked with head lowered, docile as any ox led to market. Only its size and the faint luminescence that still clung to its white coat marked it as something other than ordinary. The road to Tyrrhens stretched inland through farmlands still heavy with dew. Heracles walked slowly, matching his pace to the bull's measured steps. They passed fields where early workers paused in their labor, leaning on tools to watch the strange procession. Some touched their foreheads in respect. Others simply stared, mouths slightly open, seeing myth made flesh walking past rows of barley and wheat. By midday, the palace walls rose before them, stone-baked pale gold by countless summers. Guards at the gate straightened when they recognized him, though their eyes went wide at sight of his companion. One ran ahead to announce their arrival, while others simply stepped aside, making space for the god-touched beast that followed the hero like a trained hound. The courtyard felt smaller than Heracles remembered. Or perhaps he had grown larger through labor and distance. 8 tasks completed. 8 impossible things made real through patience and blood and will. The familiar stones beneath his feet should have felt like homecoming, but they registered only as waypoint. Another stop along a journey not yet finished. King Eurystheus did not emerge from his chambers. Instead, his steward appeared, a thin man whose hands never quite stopped trembling. He gestured toward the stables without meeting Heracles' eyes, as if looking directly at the bull might turn him to stone or salt. "His Majesty requests the beast be secured," the steward said, voice barely above whisper. "He will inspect it when properly contained." Heracles said nothing. He led the bull to the largest stable, a structure built to house royal horses and visiting dignitaries' mounts. The space smelled of clean straw and oiled leather. Someone had prepared it carefully, reinforcing walls and fitting the door with 3 separate bars. The bull entered without resistance, hooves muffling on thick bedding. It turned once in the generous space, then lowered itself to the ground with surprising grace. Steam rose from its body in the stable's dimness, and for a moment the divine fire flared brighter, illuminating whitewashed walls with soft blue-white light. "Rest well," Heracles said quietly. He stepped outside and waited while stable hands secured the door. The sound of bars sliding home felt like prison gates closing, and something tightened in his chest. The bull had harmed no one on their journey. It had walked willingly into captivity. And now it would spend days or weeks penned in darkness while Eurystheus worked up courage to look upon it. He turned away before the familiar anger could rise too high. Anger served no purpose here. The labor was complete. That was what mattered. A servant brought water and bread to his usual quarters, a small room beneath the palace's eastern wall where afternoon light slanted through a narrow window. Heracles ate without tasting, drank without noticing. His body moved through familiar motions while his mind drifted north, already wondering what impossible task awaited next. The answer came that evening. Eurystheus summoned him to the throne room as shadows lengthened and torches were lit along the walls. The king sat rigid on his seat, fingers gripping armrests with white-knuckle pressure. He had not gone to see the bull. Heracles understood that without asking. "The 9th labor," Eurystheus said, words emerging too quickly, tumbling over each other in his haste. "You must travel to Thrace, to the kingdom of Diomedes. He keeps horses there, mares of exceptional quality." Heracles waited. There was always more, always the hidden twist that transformed simple task into nightmare. "The mares eat flesh," Eurystheus continued, still not meeting his eyes. "Human flesh. Diomedes feeds them prisoners and strangers, and anyone who offends his pride. The beasts are mad with it. Savage beyond any natural creature's right." The throne room fell silent except for torches crackling in their brackets. Somewhere in the palace depths, someone was singing, voice muffled by stone and distance. The melody carried no words Heracles could distinguish, only rhythm and longing. "You will bring these mares to me," the king said finally. "Alive and unharmed. That is the labor." Heracles studied Eurystheus in the flickering light. The king's face was pale, sheened with sweat despite the evening's coolness. Fear lived in him like second heartbeat, constant and exhausting. Fear of the hero standing before him. Fear of the goddess whose commands he followed. fear of his own inadequacy wearing crown and title. For a moment, something almost like pity stirred in Heracles' chest. Then he remembered the bull penned in darkness, the hydra rotting in Lerna's swamps, the lion's pelt he wore that marked him forever as monster slayer. Pity was luxury he could not afford. "I will leave at dawn," he said simply. Eurystheus nodded, relief visible in the slight loosening of his shoulders. He waved one hand in dismissal, already looking past Heracles towards safer concerns. The audience was finished. Heracles walked back through corridors grown familiar through repetition. His footsteps echoed against stone, matching the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Thrace lay far to the north, beyond mountains and rivers and lands where Greek was foreign tongue. The journey would take weeks, perhaps months, depending on roads and weather and whatever obstacles waited between here and there. In his room, he gathered what little he carried: the lion's pelt, his club, worn smooth by years of use, a knife gifted by grateful farmers whose fields he had cleared of bandits, nothing more. He traveled light because heavy burdens weighted in every direction, and adding physical weight to that load served no purpose. Through the window, stars emerged in darkening sky. The same stars that had watched him wrestle the Nemean lion, track the golden hind, drive the boar through winter snow. They offered no guidance, no comfort. They simply existed, burning with cold fire that would outlast all mortal struggles and godly commands. Heracles lay down on the narrow bed without undressing. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of horses screaming and the taste of ash. The dawn that woke Heracles carried the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. Heavy clouds sat low over Tiryns, turning the world grey and close, the kind of morning that pressed against the skin with damp insistence. He rose in half-darkness, splashed water on his face from the clay basin, and dressed in silence. The palace still slept. Even the kitchens were quiet, their fires not yet stoked. He walked through empty corridors toward the stables where the Cretan bull waited. Some impulse he could not name drew him there, though logic said farewell to a captured animal served no purpose. The guards nodded as he passed, faces blank with early morning exhaustion. The bull stood when he entered, rising from the straw with that same impossible grace. Its white coat caught the dim light filtering through high windows, and for a moment the divine fire flickered across its hide like heat lightning. It watched him with dark eyes that held no accusation, no resentment. Only ancient patience. "I leave you here," Heracles said quietly. "I wish it were otherwise." The bull lowered its head, breath steaming in the cool air. Then it turned away, settling back into the straw as if understanding that this goodbye meant nothing, changed nothing. Captivity would continue whether witnessed or not. Heracles left before the tightness in his chest could become something harder to carry. The road north wound through farmland still wet with dew. Workers were appearing in distant fields, small figures bent to early tasks. Some paused to watch him pass, recognizing the lion's pelt, the deliberate stride. They did not wave or call out. His presence was omen, not comfort. Where heroes walked, trouble followed. By midday, the clouds had lifted without releasing their rain. The landscape opened into rolling hills covered with wild grasses that moved like water in the wind. Heracles walked steadily, not hurrying, preserving strength for whatever waited ahead. 9 labors now behind him. 3 remaining. The end was visible, if still distant, like mountains on a clear horizon. He thought of the mares as he walked, flesh-eating horses. The phrase itself seemed wrong, contradictory. Horses were creatures of grain and meadow grass, of gentleness despite their size. To twist that nature into something savage spoke of deliberate cruelty, the kind that required maintenance and feeding and choice. Diomedes. The name meant nothing to Heracles beyond what Eurystheus had revealed, a king in Thrace who kept monsters for reasons only he understood. Pride, the messenger had said. But pride took many forms, wore many masks. Perhaps Diomedes believed the mares made him powerful. Perhaps he simply enjoyed watching fear in strangers' eyes. The why mattered less than the what. 4 horses, mad with unnatural appetite. A stable built to contain them. Guards to manage feeding. And somewhere in that arrangement, a weakness that could be exploited, because everything built by mortal hands contained cracks where leverage might be applied. 3 days out from Tiryns, he reached the mountains that marked the border between familiar lands and the north. The pass rose steep and rocky, narrow enough that a single defender could hold it against armies. But the pass was empty, only goats watching from high ledges with yellow eyes and calm indifference. At the summit, wind struck cold and constant. Heracles paused there, looking back at the land he was leaving. Greece spread below in shades of green and gold, dotted with white villages and dark olive groves. The sea was visible in the distance, a strip of blue that met the sky without clear boundary. Then he turned north and began descending into different country. The language changed first. In villages where he stopped for water or bread, the tongue was familiar enough that he could make himself understood, but consonants twisted differently, vowels stretched long in unexpected places. People watched him with careful reserve, offering what he needed, but volunteering nothing beyond the transaction. The landscape changed too. Trees grew denser, darker. Fields gave way to forests that pressed close to the road, and the road itself became less certain, more suggestion than command. Rivers ran faster here, colder, fed by mountain snow that never fully melted. 10 days from Tiryns, he encountered his first evidence of Diomedes' kingdom. A wooden marker stood beside the road, carved with symbols Heracles could not read but understood nonetheless. Territory claimed. Laws enforced. Strangers watched. The villages beyond that marker felt different. People moved quickly, spoke quietly, glanced toward the north with expressions that mixed fear and resignation. When Heracles asked about the king, doors closed. When he inquired about the mares, conversations ended mid-sentence. Only one old woman, drawing water from a well, would speak. Her Greek was rough, but clear enough. "You go to the horses," she said, not questioning. "Many go. Few return." "I don't intend to be eaten," Heracles replied. She studied him with eyes gone cloudy at the edges. "Intention is not protection. The mares are cursed. King feeds them what kingdom should protect, and the horses grow madder with each feeding. How many? 4. Mare, each one. Names once, but names forgotten. Only hunger remembered now." Heracles thanked her and turned north again. The road climbed through pine forest where shadows lay thick even at midday. Birds fell silent as he passed. Something in the air tasted of metal and old blood. Diomedes' palace appeared suddenly, breaking from the trees like a ship emerging from fog. It was not beautiful. Timber walls, dark with age, watchtowers at each corner. The banner flying above the gate showed a horse rearing against black background, teeth bared in profile. Guards stopped him at the gate. They were young, nervous, gripping spears with hands that trembled slightly. Heracles named himself, stated his purpose. The guards exchanged glances. "King Diomedes does not receive visitors," one said. "I'm not visiting," Heracles replied. "Tell him Zeus's son has come for the mares." The title worked as it always did, opening doors that would otherwise remain closed. The guards withdrew, returning shortly with orders. Heracles was admitted, but warned to keep weapons sheathed, to show respect. To understand that the king's hospitality had limits. Inside, the palace smelled of smoke and horses, and something underneath that made the stomach tighten. The halls were narrow, ceilings low. Servants moved along the walls, faces carefully blank. Diomedes received him in a hall lit by smoky torches. The king was younger than Heracles expected, perhaps 30, with a face that might have been handsome without the hardness that turned features into mask. He sat on a throne carved from dark wood, one hand resting on the head of a hunting dog that watched Heracles with measured interest. The hero, Diomedes said, voice carrying amusement. Come for my mares, how refreshingly direct. I need them alive, Heracles replied. Unharmed. That's the task. Tasks. The king smiled without warmth. We all have tasks. Mine is to rule this land and keep its borders secure. The mares assist with that. They discourage raiders, bandits, unwanted guests. One wonders what task requires you to steal another king's property. Penance, Heracles said simply. Something flickered across Diomedes' face. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow prisoner of fate. Then the hardness returned. The mares are not for sale or trade or theft. They remain here because they serve purpose. You may go. Heracles did not move. I'll take them regardless. How much blood is spilled in the taking depends on you. The dog growled. Guards stepped forward, hands on weapons. Diomedes raised one finger, and the room froze. Tonight, the king said quietly, you'll dine with me. As guest, protected by laws of hospitality. We'll speak further then. Perhaps agreement can be reached. It was trap, obviously. But sometimes the only way forward was through the trap, acknowledging its presence while refusing to let it dictate outcome. I accept, Heracles said. Diomedes smiled again, and this time the expression reached his eyes. Not warmth, anticipation. The hall grew quieter as afternoon light faded behind shuttered windows. Servants moved through shadows, lighting torches that burned with the same smoky reluctance as before. Heracles was shown to chambers in the eastern wing, small rooms that smelled of damp stone and old timber. A basin of water waited beside the narrow bed. A window looked north toward forested hills already darkening with approaching night. He did not sleep. Instead, he sat on the bed's edge, checking the knife at his belt, testing the weight of the club that had traveled with him since Nemea. The lion's pelt lay across his shoulders, its familiar weight a comfort. Through the walls he heard horses screaming, not the clean sound of animals at exercise, but something else. Something wrong. When servants came to escort him to dinner, the sun had set completely. They led him through corridors lit by torches placed too far apart, leaving pools of darkness between each circle of light. The dining hall was smaller than the throne room, with a single long table and chairs carved from the same dark wood that seemed to define this place. Diomedes sat at the head, already eating. He gestured for Heracles to sit at his right, close enough for conversation, far enough to maintain distinction. Plates arrived, bread and meat and wine in cups that caught the torchlight. The food was well prepared, but Heracles ate little, watching the king instead. "You're cautious," Diomedes observed. "Wise. These days, one cannot trust hospitality as our grandfathers did. The old laws fray at edges. Gods withdraw. Men do what they must to survive." "Feeding people to horses isn't survival," Heracles said quietly. "It's madness dressed as necessity." The king paused, cup halfway to his lips. Then he drank, set the wine down with careful precision. "The mares came to me wild. Divine blood somewhere in their ancestry, or curse. They could not be tamed through kindness, could not be gentled with grain and soft words. They demanded something stronger. Humans fear them. Enemies flee from their reputation. The kingdom remains secure. Tell me, hero, what would you have done differently? Found another way." "Ah, another way." Diomedes leaned back, studying Heracles with something like curiosity, the luxury of those who've never ruled. "You walk alone, serve penance for crimes committed in madness. Your burden is personal. Mine extends to every soul within these borders. If 4 cursed horses, fed occasionally on those who would harm my people, keep raiders at bay, is that not justice of a kind?" Heracles set down his own cup. "You've convinced yourself. That's different from being right." Something shifted in the king's expression. The mask cracked slightly, revealing exhaustion underneath. "Do you think I enjoy it?" "The first time, I wept. A bandit, caught stealing from villages, sentenced to death regardless. The mares were starving, mad with hunger I could not satisfy. So I made the choice. And the horses calmed, and the borders held. Each feeding after became easier, not because I'm cruel, but because I learned to see it as necessity. You'll understand, perhaps, when you've ruled, when lives depend on choices that leave stains on the soul." "I won't rule," Heracles said. "And I won't carry those stains. The mares leave with me tonight. You can resist or accept. Either way, the outcome doesn't change." Diomedes smiled, but there was sadness in it now. "You're right about one thing. The outcome is decided, but not as you imagine." The king clapped twice. Guards appeared from the shadows more than before, surrounding the table. They held spears, swords, expressions of men following orders they'd stopped questioning long ago. "Guest right protects you until dawn," Diomedes said, standing. "After that, you become trespasser. The mares will feed well tomorrow. I regret the necessity, truly. But kingdoms are built on regrettable necessities." He left the hall, dog trailing at his heels. The guards remained, watching Heracles with wary attention. He could fight them, perhaps win, but guest right was real, binding, sacred, even in this dark place. To break it would stain his own soul worse than any labor, so instead he nodded to the guards and returned to his chambers. They locked the door behind him, iron bolt sliding home with finality. Through the window, the hoarse screams continued, rhythmic now, almost like song. Heracles waited until deep night, when torches burned lowest and guards grew tired. The window was narrow, but not impossible. He slipped through into cold air that tasted of pine and coming frost, landing in shadows beside the palace wall. The stables stood apart from the main building, surrounded by fencing reinforced with iron. The smell reached him first, sharp and metallic and wrong. Inside, he heard movement, hooves against stone, breathing that whistled strangely. He approached the stable doors. They were barred from outside, heavy timber crossbeams designed to keep something in rather than out. He lifted them slowly, quietly, setting them aside. The doors swung open, and darkness breezed outward. 4 mares stood in the largest stalls, separated by walls topped with iron spikes. They were beautiful once, perhaps still were beneath the madness. White coats stained dark, eyes reflecting torchlight with an unnatural gleam. When they saw him, they screamed again, throwing themselves against the barriers with force that shook the walls. Heracles stepped inside, club in hand, but lowered. "Easy," he said, voice calm despite the chaos. "I'm not here to hurt you." The nearest mare bared teeth worn sharp somehow, yellowed and wrong. She pawed the ground, scraping stone. In her eyes he saw not just madness, but suffering. Something in her wanted release, wanted peace, wanted anything except this endless hunger. Behind him, the stable doors burst fully open. Diomedes entered with guards, torches blazing, weapons drawn. "Bold," the king said, "but futile. The mares will tear you apart before you take 3 steps." Heracles looked at the horses, then at the king, then made his decision. He moved faster than the guards expected, not toward the horses but toward Diomedes himself. He caught the king by the throat, lifting him easily, carrying him toward the nearest stall. "Stop," Diomedes gasped. "Guessed right. Dawn came while we spoke," Heracles replied quietly. "Guessed right" ended. "You're not my host anymore." Just a man who fed innocence to beasts and called it necessity. He opened the stall door. The mare inside reared, screaming. Heracles threw Diomedes inside and slammed the door shut. The king scrambled backward, eyes wide, face pale. "No," he whispered, "please." The mare approached slowly, teeth bared. But she did not attack immediately. She studied the king, head tilted, as if recognizing the source of her torment. Then she struck. The guards fled. They dropped weapons and ran into the night, footsteps fading. Heracles remained, watching. He opened the other stalls, letting the mares feed on the one who had fed them. When they were finished, he approached slowly. They did not attack him. Their eyes, though still strange, held something different now. Exhaustion. Relief. The hunger that had defined them suddenly, inexplicably gone. He led them from the stable into pale pre-dawn light. They followed like tame horses, violence drained, replaced by quiet acceptance. The journey south began in silence. 4 white mares walked behind Heracles without need for rope or restraint, their hooves ringing soft against stone roads that wound between forests of dark pine. Morning mist clung to low valleys, and somewhere in the distance crows called to one another across invisible boundaries. Heracles did not look back toward Thrace. The kingdom would manage without its king, or it would not. Either way, the choice belonged to those who remained, and he had learned long ago not to carry burdens that were not his own. The mares were enough. They walked through that first day without stopping, except to drink from clear streams that cut through birch groves. The horses drank deeply, water running from their muzzles in silver threads. Their coats were still stained, but the wildness had left their eyes. They moved like ordinary animals now, tired and uncertain, but no longer mad. By evening, they reached a village whose name Heracles never learned. Farmers watched from doorways as he passed through the single dusty street, the white mares trailing behind him like ghosts. Children pointed and whispered. An old woman made a sign against evil, fingers twisted into shapes her grandmother had taught her. Heracles stopped at the village well and drew water for the horses. They drank while he rested on the stone rim, watching the sun settle behind hills that rolled away toward the southern horizon. A young man approached, hesitant, carrying a wooden bowl. "You're the one from the stories," the young man said. It was not quite a question. "I'm someone," Heracles replied. "Stories are rarely accurate. The lion skin suggests otherwise." The young man gestured toward the pelt draped across Heracles' shoulders. "We heard about Nemea. About the Hydra. Are those truly the horses of Diomedes?" Heracles looked at the mares. They stood quietly now, heads lowered, tails swishing at flies. They were. Now they're just horses. "What happened to the king? He fed the wrong thing to the wrong creatures," Heracles said. "It ended poorly for him." The young man nodded slowly, then offered the bowl. It held bread, cheese, dried fruit. "We don't have much, but we can share." Heracles accepted the food with gratitude. He ate slowly, watching the village settle into evening routines. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Mothers called children inside. Somewhere a dog barked, sharp and brief, then went silent. When darkness came fully, he slept beneath an oak tree at the village edge, the mares standing watch around him like sentinels. He dreamed of nothing, which was a mercy. They continued south for 3 more days. The landscape changed gradually, pine giving way to olive groves and dusty hills covered in wild thyme. The air grew warmer. The sky stretched wider. And with each mile, the mares seemed to shed more of what Thrace had made them. On the 4th day, they passed a battlefield. It was old, the fighting long finished, but bones still littered the ground where scavengers had scattered them. Broken spears jutted from earth like accusing fingers. The mares stopped walking, snorting nervously, pawing at stone. Heracles led them around the field carefully, keeping to the road's far edge. One mare, the smallest, began to tremble. He stopped and placed a hand on her neck, feeling the rapid flutter of her pulse beneath skin. "It's over," he told her quietly. "Whatever you remember, it's finished now." She calmed slowly, breath evening out, muscles relaxing. They moved on. That evening, they reached a traveler's shrine dedicated to Hermes, god of roads and journeys. The small stone structure stood beside a crossroads, offerings of bread and wine left by those seeking safe passage. Heracles added dried meat from his pack and spoke no prayer aloud. The gods heard what they wanted to hear regardless of words. He rested there through sunset, watching the sky turn from gold to rose to deep purple. The mares grazed on wild grass growing between stones. A shepherd passed with his flock, nodded respectfully, continued without speaking. Silence felt appropriate somehow, better than words that would only state the obvious. By the time they reached Tiryns, the mares had been walking for 7 days. They looked different now, cleaner despite the travel, calmer despite the long roads. Their eyes held simple weariness rather than the terrible gleam that had defined them in Diomedes' stables. King Eurystheus received them in his courtyard, surrounded by guards who kept careful distance from both hero and horses. He stood on the palace steps, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. "The horses of Diomedes," he said. "I confess, I did not expect to see you return." "Your expectations aren't my concern," Heracles replied. He gestured toward the mares. 10 labors complete. The horses are yours to do with as you will." Eurystheus descended the steps slowly, studying the animals with visible suspicion. They seemed docile. Too docile. Where is their legendary savagery? Gone. They fed on the source of their madness and found peace. "You killed Diomedes. I gave him to his own creation. The outcome was inevitable." The king circled the horses, maintaining distance, looking for some sign of deception. The mares stood quietly, occasionally shifting weight, tails swishing. They looked like ordinary horses because that is what they had become. "Very well," Eurystheus said finally. "I accept this labor as complete. But do not think yourself finished. 2 more remain, and they will test you beyond anything you have yet faced." Heracles said nothing. He had learned that silence often served better than argument, especially with men like Eurystheus, who measured worth through suffering imposed. The king gestured to his guards. "Stable these animals in the southern pastures. Keep them separated from the other horses until we determine their temperament." As the guards led the mares away, the smallest one turned her head. Looking back at Heracles with what might have been gratitude or might have been nothing at all. Then she was gone, disappearing into the stable complex where the sounds of ordinary life continued without pause. Eurystheus dismissed Heracles with a wave. No thanks, no acknowledgement beyond the bare minimum required. The hero turned and left the courtyard, lion skin shifting across his shoulders, club worn smooth by years of travel. Outside the palace, the afternoon sun warmed the dusty streets of Tiryns. Merchants called their wares. Children played complicated games with rules only they understood. Life continued as it always did, indifferent to heroes and their labors. Heracles walked toward the city gates, already thinking of the next journey, the next impossible task. Only 2 remained now. 2 more chances to prove something that perhaps could not be proven, to cleanse something that perhaps would never wash clean. But he had come this far. The western edge of the world awaited, where Geryon kept his red cattle beneath skies that tasted of salt and endings. And after that, stranger things still. The road stretched before him, empty and familiar. Somewhere behind, 4 white mares grazed in peaceful fields, their nightmares finally ended. It was not redemption exactly, but it was something. The days following the 10th labor moved slowly, like honey dripping from a comb. Heracles remained near Tiryns, not because Eurystheus required his presence, but because his body demanded rest. 10 labors had carved themselves into muscle and bone, left marks no water could wash away. He found lodging in a small house at the city's edge, where an old widow rented rooms to travelers and asked no questions. She brought him bread and olives in the mornings, left them outside his door with wine diluted in the proper manner. He paid her well and spoke little. She seemed content with this arrangement. During those quiet days, he heard rumors filtering through the marketplace like smoke through floorboards. Travelers spoke of gardens at the world's edge where golden apples grew, tended by nymphs whose songs could make stones weep. Others mentioned Atlas, the titan who held the sky on his shoulders, standing somewhere beyond where maps ended and imagination began. Heracles listened without revealing his interest. Knowledge gathered slowly often proved more reliable than knowledge seized in haste. On the seventh day, a messenger arrived at the widow's house. The boy was young, nervous, twisting the hem of his tunic while delivering Eurystheus's summons. Heracles followed him back through narrow streets that smelled of baking bread and tanning leather. Sounds of ordinary life continuing around them like water flowing past stones. The throne room felt cooler than the streets outside. Eurystheus sat surrounded by advisors who pretended importance through elaborate gestures and expensive robes. The king dismissed them with a flick of his wrist. "Your 11th labor," he said without preamble, "requires you to bring me 3 golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides." Heracles waited. There was always more. "The garden lies beyond the western edge of the known world," Eurystheus continued, studying his fingernails, as if they contained great wisdom. "It is guarded by a serpent that never sleeps and tended by daughters of Atlas himself. The apples are sacred to Hera, gifts given at her wedding to Zeus. Many have sought them, none have returned. And if I refuse?" "You won't." The king smiled without warmth. 10 labors complete means only 2 remain. You're too stubborn to stop now." The truth of this settled between them like dust after footsteps. Heracles turned to leave. "One more thing," Eurystheus called after him. "No one knows where the garden stands exactly. You'll need to find that answer yourself." Outside, the sun had reached its highest point, turning shadows small and sharp beneath feet. Heracles walked toward the city gates, already planning provisions, already turning the problem over in his mind like a stone examined for flaws. The garden's location remained unknown, but myths and rumors left traces. He would follow those traces west and north, toward places where the air grew thin and mountains touched clouds. 3 days of travel brought him into high country, where pine trees grew twisted by wind and snow, lingered in shadowed ravines despite summer's warmth. The paths here were maintained by shepherds who moved between highland pastures, following ancient routes marked by cairns and scratches on stone. He met an old shepherd beside a stream where water ran cold and clear over rounded rocks. The man's face carried the texture of bark, weathered by decades of sun and wind. "I seek the garden of the Hesperides," Heracles said simply. The shepherd filled his waterskin without looking up. "Men who seek that place don't usually announce it so plainly. I'm not like most men, I can see that." The shepherd gestured at the lionskin, the club. "Even so, gardens don't move, but the paths to them shift like smoke. You want answers? Go higher. There's a peak 3 days north where something old is chained. Perhaps it remembers what you need to know." Heracles thanked him and continued climbing. The air grew thinner, each breath requiring more effort. At night, he built small fires from deadwood and slept wrapped in the lionskin, listening to wind move through high places where few voices reached. On the second day, he saw the mountain. It rose alone from surrounding peaks, black stone streaked with snow that never melted, summit lost in clouds that held themselves perfectly still. Something about its shape felt deliberate, as if the world had placed it there for specific purposes. He climbed through morning and afternoon, following narrow paths that switchbacked across cliff faces. Eagles circled overhead, their cries sharp and distant. By evening, he had reached a plateau where the wind carried strange sounds, almost like moaning, almost like words worn smooth by endless repetition. That's when he saw the Titan. Prometheus hung chained to the mountain's eastern face, arms spread wide, legs bound at ankles. Iron links thicker than Heracles' wrists connected him to rock that showed no seams or weakness. The Titan's body bore scars that spoke of centuries, wounds that healed only to be opened again by the eagle that came each dawn to feast on his liver. The Titan's eyes opened as Heracles approached. They held depths that made mortal gazers seem shallow as puddles, "Heracles," Prometheus said, voice rough but steady. "Son of Zeus, I wondered when you would arrive. You know me, I know many things. Foresight was always my gift and my curse." The Titan shifted slightly, chains rattling like distant thunder. "You seek the garden of the Hesperides. I need 3 golden apples. Of course you do." Eurystheus grows creative in his cruelty. Prometheus managed something that might have been a smile. "The garden lies beyond the Western Ocean, where sunset meets the edge of everything. But you cannot simply walk there. The way is barred to mortals and most gods." "Then how?" "Atlas knows the path. He stands at the world's edge, holding up the sky. The Hesperides are his daughters. He could retrieve the apples if properly motivated." Heracles studied the chains, their ancient metal, their impossible strength. "And you tell me this because?" "Because I would bargain. Free me from these chains, and I will tell you how to convince Atlas. Otherwise, you'll wander until the stars grow cold." The hero pulled his club free, examining the links where they joined the rock. They had been forged by gods, set by Zeus himself as punishment for Prometheus's theft of fire. Breaking them would mean defying the king of Olympus. But 10 labors completed meant only 2 remained, and the path forward required choices that bent rules already strained to breaking. Heracles swung the club. The impact rang across the plateau like a bell struck in darkness. The first chain shattered, fragments falling away like leaves from autumn trees. He struck again and again, each blow sending echoes across empty sky. When the final chain broke, Prometheus fell forward, catching himself on hands that remembered freedom. He stood slowly, stretching muscles that had been locked in place for longer than cities had existed. "Thank you," the Titan said softly. "Tell me how to reach Atlas. Travel west until you find the pillars that mark where ocean begins. Beyond them, Atlas stands. Offer to hold the sky while he retrieves the apples. But be warned, the weight of heaven is not easily borne, even by heroes. And Atlas, once freed, may not wish to return. I'll manage." "Yes," Prometheus agreed, looking at Heracles with something like pity. "I believe you will." The Titan walked to the plateau's edge and gazed west, toward lands hidden beyond curve and distance. His body still carried the shape of chains, shoulders marked by their weight even now released. "The pillars stand where Earth runs out of conviction," Prometheus said. "You'll know them when the ground begins to doubt itself." Heracles adjusted the lion skin across his shoulders. "How far?" "Far enough that you'll forget the taste of wine before you arrive. The path runs through kingdoms that have no names in your language, across rivers that flow backward when the moon is dark." The Titan turned, his eyes reflecting firelight that came from no visible source. "But you've walked strange roads before. This one will simply be stranger." They stood together in the growing darkness, watching stars emerge one by one like seeds scattered across black earth. The wind carried scents from lower valleys, pine and wild thyme, reminders that the world continued below while they spoke of its edges. "The eagle," Heracles said. "Will it return? Each dawn for eternity, or so Zeus decreed. But perhaps eternity has learned flexibility." Prometheus touched his side where the worst scars lay, tissue that had been destroyed and remade countless times. "I'll find shelter before sunrise." "There are caves in these mountains deep enough to hide even gods." "I should go." "Yes. Dawn comes whether we're ready or not." The Titan paused, then added, "When you meet Atlas, remember this. He's been standing longer than memory. The sky's weight has become his only certainty. Offering freedom may feel like offering chaos to something that has forgotten what freedom means." Heracles nodded and began his descent. Behind him, Prometheus remained on the plateau, watching the hero disappear into shadow. The Titan would move before sunrise, seeking darkness that even Zeus's eagle couldn't penetrate. But for now, he stood free beneath stars he had not seen clearly in ages beyond counting. The journey west took longer than Heracles expected. He passed through territories where dialects shifted every 3 valleys, where gods wore names he'd never heard whispered in Tiryns or Thebes. People offered food and shelter, then told stories about travelers who had walked this way before, seeking things at world's end that were best left undisturbed. He crossed a river that ran uphill during certain phases of the moon, its water tasting of copper and old promises. He walked through forests where trees grew in spirals, their bark marked with symbols that predated written language. At night, he heard singing from no visible source, melodies that made his heart ache without understanding why. The land began to change. Soil turned sandy, then rocky, then simply sparse, as if the earth itself was losing interest in maintaining form. Grass became brittle, trees shortened to shrubs, shrubs gave way to scattered stones that looked uncertain about their purpose. Then he saw them. 2 massive pillars rising from where land met ocean, carved from stone that held colors he had no words for. They stood like sentries guarding the threshold between known world and whatever lay beyond. Waves crashed against their bases, sending spray high enough to catch afternoon light and fracture it into temporary rainbows. Between the pillars, the ocean stretched toward a horizon that seemed farther away than horizons should be. The water there held strange qualities, its surface too smooth, its color too deep, as if it was ocean in the same way dreams are thoughts, real, but not quite tangible. And at the edge, where water met sky in a seam barely visible, stood Atlas. The Titan was larger than mountains, his body formed from something between flesh and living stone. His shoulders bore the entire vault of heaven, a weight that pressed down with force that would crush normal matter into concepts too small for names. The sky itself rested against his palms, that endless blue dome holding stars and clouds, and all the space between Earth and whatever existed above. His face showed strain that had become permanent. Features set in an expression that had forgotten all others. Muscles stood out like ridges on cliff faces, locked in eternal tension. His feet had sunk deep into the earth over countless years, becoming part of the bedrock beneath ocean's edge. Heracles stood at the base of the westernmost pillar and called out. His voice sounded small against the crash of waves and the creaking of the cosmos itself. That deep groaning sound the sky makes against shoulders strong enough to hold it. Atlas's eyes shifted downward. They were gray as storm clouds, ancient as tides. Another hero, the Titan rumbled. His voice was the sound of continents grinding together, slow and inevitable. You all look the same from this height, small and temporary. I seek the golden apples of the Hesperides. Everyone seeks something. The apples are not for mortal hands. I don't dispute their sanctity, but I need 3 of them, and your daughters guard them well. Heracles moved closer, until he stood directly beneath the Titan's gaze. I can offer you something in return. What could you possibly offer me? Rest. Brief, but genuine. I'll hold the sky while you retrieve the apples. Your arms could lower. Your shoulders could ease. Even for a few moments you could remember what it feels like to stand without weight. Atlas was silent for a long time. Waves continued their rhythm against stone. Gulls cried overhead, their voices thin against the immensity of the scene. You don't know what you're offering to carry, the Titan finally said. The sky's weight isn't merely physical. It contains all of heaven's substance, every star's mass, every cloud's moisture, every breath of wind that has ever blown. It's the sum of everything above. Heroes have offered before. Their bones are dust now, crushed the moment they tried to bear even a fraction of it, are not like other heroes. They all say that too. But something flickered in Atlas's expression. Something that might have been desperate hope, worn so thin it was nearly transparent. If you fail, you'll die instantly. There won't be time for regret. Then I won't fail. Atlas studied him, gaze moving across the lion skin, the scars, the club, the eyes that had seen the underworld and returned. Finally, The Titan nodded, a movement so vast it seemed the entire horizon shifted with it. Approach. Stand beside me. When I say, brace yourself against everything you think is solid. Push upward with strength you didn't know existed. And whatever you do, don't let your knees bend even slightly, because if they do, you'll be driven straight down through the Earth's core. Heracles moved forward, positioning himself beside the Titan. Atlas's body radiated heat from eternal effort, warmth that had nothing to do with sunlight. The sound of the cosmos pressing down was louder here, a constant pressure against the air itself. "Ready?" Atlas asked. "Ready. Now." Atlas shifted his weight, and for one impossible moment, the sky began to descend toward Heracles' upraised hands. Then it touched his palms, and the weight crashed down like all of creation had decided to exist specifically on his shoulders. He nearly buckled, nearly fell. The weight was beyond comprehension, beyond any force he'd encountered in all his labors. It was the mass of infinity compressed into something his mortal body was attempting to bear. But he didn't fall. His legs locked, his shoulders set. His spine became iron, and his will became something harder than iron. The lion skin burned against his back. His teeth ground together. Every muscle screamed in languages pain usually doesn't speak. Above him, the sky settled into place, and Atlas stepped away. The Titan's arms lowered for the first time in ages beyond measure. His shoulders dropped, and he made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh, or simply the release of pressure held too long. He stretched, joints popping like distant thunder, and for a moment he simply stood there, experiencing what it meant to exist without burden. Then he turned and walked away. Moving west across the ocean toward gardens hidden beyond sight, toward daughters who remembered him only as the father who held up heaven and never came home. Heracles stood alone, bearing the sky, counting heartbeats because there was nothing else to count. Time stopped meaning anything under the weight of stars. Heracles couldn't tell if Atlas had been gone for minutes or hours. Each heartbeat stretched into an eternity. Each breath required negotiation with forces that didn't recognize mortal lungs as worthy participants in the act of breathing. The ocean continued its rhythm below. Birds crossed overhead, unaware they flew through space maintained by will alone. Somewhere, he knew, the world continued. Farmers planted seeds. Children laughed. Merchants argued over copper weights. None of them felt the specific agony of holding creation above their heads. His vision began to narrow at the edges. Colors bled into one another. The horizon wavered like heat rising from summer stones. Then, finally, movement at the world's edge. Atlas returned, walking across that impossible ocean, holding 3 golden apples that glowed with their own light. Even from a distance, Heracles could see the change in the Titan's posture. His daughters had welcomed him. He had walked freely for the first time since Zeus and his siblings had claimed dominion. Atlas stopped several paces away from where Heracles stood locked beneath heaven's weight. "I've brought them," the Titan said, holding up the apples. 3, as you requested. They're more beautiful than I remembered. More perfect. He paused, eyes traveling from the golden fruit to the hero struggling beneath the sky. "I've been thinking during my walk. Perhaps I should deliver these apples to Eurystheus myself. You seem busy here, and I'm enjoying the freedom of movement, the ability to walk without weight, to see the world from something other than a fixed position." Heracles understood instantly. The Titan had no intention of taking back his burden. Why would he? For the first time in ages, Atlas was free. Every fiber of Heracles' body screamed for release. His bones felt ready to splinter. His muscles had moved beyond pain into territories where sensation became something else entirely. It would be so easy to simply accept this, to become the next eternal bearer while Atlas wandered the world unencumbered. But Heracles had learned patience from chasing golden deer. He had learned strategy from Hydra's multiplying heads. He had learned to think even when his body demanded he simply react. "You're right," he said, voice strained but steady. "You should deliver them yourself. But I'm not accustomed to this burden yet. The sky sits unevenly on my shoulders. Before you go, would you take it back for just a moment? Show me the proper position, the exact angle. Then I'll hold it correctly, and you can walk free forever." Atlas hesitated. For several heartbeats, the Titan stood perfectly still, weighing the request. Heracles held his breath, which was difficult while holding the cosmos. Finally, Atlas stepped forward. "Very well. Briefly. But watch carefully. The weight distributes like this." He set down the golden apples and raised his arms. The moment the sky's weight transferred back to Atlas's shoulders, Heracles stepped away. His body sang with relief so profound, it felt like being born again into a world where up and down made sense. He grabbed the 3 golden apples from where they rested on stone. Atlas's expression shifted through several configurations before settling on something between resignation and grudging respect. "Clever," the Titan said. "Prometheus warned me your kind had grown cunning. I should have listened." "I'm sorry," Heracles said, and meant it. "You deserve rest, but my labors aren't finished yet, and the world still needs someone to hold the sky. Not because it's fair, but because it's necessary." "Necessity," Atlas repeated, the word heavy in his mouth. "The excuse that justifies everything and absolves nothing." He readjusted the sky on his shoulders, settling back into the position his body remembered too well. "Go then. Complete your tasks. But remember this moment when someone tells you that your suffering serves some greater purpose." Heracles turned away, golden apples warm in his hands, throat tight with words he couldn't speak. Behind him, Atlas returned to stillness, once again becoming part of the landscape where ocean met sky and titans held the weight of everything above. The journey back seemed longer than the journey there. Heracles walked through those strange forests with their spiral-growing trees. He crossed territories where rivers forgot which direction they were supposed to flow. He passed through lands that gradually remembered solidity, earth gaining conviction with each eastward step. When he finally stood before Eurystheus and placed the 3 golden apples on the marble floor, the king stared at them as though confronted with proof that impossibility was merely another country that could be visited and returned from. 11, Eurystheus whispered. 11 labors completed. 1 remains, Heracles said. The king's hands trembled as he reached toward the apples, then pulled back without touching them. "For the 12th labor," he said slowly, "I command you to descend into the underworld itself. Bring me Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who guards the gates of death. Bring him here, to this palace, alive and unharmed. Then, and only then, will your service be complete." Heracles nodded once. He had known, somehow, that his final labor would require walking the path from which no living soul returns. He had circled the entire world, touched its edges, held its sky. Now only one direction remained, downward into darkness that even starlight couldn't reach. He left the palace as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, toward the pillars he had stood beside, toward the ocean where Atlas still held heaven on shoulders that would never truly rest. Somewhere in the growing dark, an entrance to the underworld waited. Tomorrow he would find it. Tonight he would sleep beneath familiar stars and dream of the last threshold he had yet to cross. The 12 labors had taught him strength, patience, cunning, and humility. Now they would teach him the final lesson, how to walk among the dead while still drawing breath, and how to return carrying proof that even death's boundaries could be crossed by someone willing to face what waited in the depths. And perhaps, if stories matter at all, they teach us something too, that the old myths hold truths worth carrying forward. If these ancient voices help you rest, you might return to Olympus Dreams again, where such tales are kept safe for those who seek peace in the remembering. The journey continues, labor by labor, night by gentle night. And there is always room for one more listener beneath the stars. Heracles closed his eyes, the golden apple still glowing softly in his memory, and let exhaustion finally claim him. Tomorrow would come with its demands, but tonight belonged to simple rest, earned through trials that would echo through every age that followed.